The last year's been a sad time for those of us who loved the fake news shows of Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert on Comedy Central. Jon Stewart was both a political and a comedic genius who just straight up attacked conservative politics and the moral hypocrisy that we have seen from the Republican Party. And he was often appraised as being the main news source of the 20 and 30-something crowd, especially among males. And I could even add maybe even the 40 and 50-something crowd, except now I've just crossed the Rubicon into the 60s. I'm a sexagenarian. Not that the police showed up to arrest me for that, but it sounds like they should have. But frankly, you watch a lot of network news and you watch Jon Stewart and you realize that he got better interviews with more insightful people, and he asked more incisive questions than the corporate media that at least presents itself as being serious journalism. Stewart also spun off the wildly successful Colbert Report, featuring the now late-night talk show host Stephen Colbert. On that show, Colbert assumed the character of a satirical take on the conservative Fox News host Bill O'Reilly. His character was wicked and wickedly funny. But the strangest part of Colbert's years-long tenure on that show came in 2006 when Stephen was invited to be the speaker at the White House Correspondents' Dinner when George W. Bush was in office. Colbert accepted the odd invitation, and he made the most of it, spending 20 minutes hammering the president and his administration, even though George W. was seated just a couple of seats away from him. But he let him know about the moral weakness and the militaristic mistakes that his administration was making. It seemed that no one in the Bush administration had realized that Colbert wasn't actually a conservative, but that he was nightly eviscerating conservatives through satire. And I wasn't the only one who marveled that absolutely no one in the Bush administration seemed to realize that they were inviting one of their sharpest critics to come into an intimate dinner setting in the White House and humiliate them on national television. It became a topic of academic research to figure out why conservatives almost always seem to not get satire, or for that matter, why there's never been a conservative version of Jon Stewart or Stephen Colbert, though there have been some attempts, but it almost seems like conservatives just don't have a sense of humor. The apparent opinion of psychologists who looked at this issue is that conservatives and liberals just don't think in the same way, and that only those who think interpretively will ever understand satire, and those who tend to think literally never do. It's tempting, honestly, it's more than tempting. Liberals generally seem to assume that conservatives are as thick as a brick, and they keep insisting on presenting us with evidence to support that conclusion. But this is apparently not just an unkind and ungenerous take on the matter, but in fact, it really goes to the fact that people think differently. Both the gifted and the simple on both sides of the political fence. We just think differently. As a student of biblical studies, I've often found it to be remarkable that otherwise intelligent, educated, professional people will still profess that they literally believe that Noah built an ark that held 2 of every kind of animal, including dinosaurs, and that Eve actually talked with a talking snake, that Moses divided the Red Sea and Jesus walked on water. Some of it is obviously rooted in our early childhood training. When I teach Western religions at Drury University, my adult Ozark, almost exclusively Christian students do not believe for a moment that Muhammad actually rode a horse one night up to heaven. That seems like silly mythology. They do, however, believe that the virgin birth, the miracles of healing, feeding the multitudes, raising the dead, turning water into wine, walking on water, and ascending straight up into heaven are just matters of historical fact, that if only Stephen Jobs had created the iPhone just a few centuries earlier, that we would actually have video of each of those things. There is no shortage of faculty lunch meetings in which we sit around and wish that we had smarter students. But when we are honest, every one of us could recount a time in our early adult life when we believed some of the absolutely silliest garbage imaginable. What makes the difference in the end is that an honest, inquiring person is willing to ask hard questions, even of our most dearly held beliefs. We allow ourselves to think critically and to be willing to change in light of new evidence. Alexander Solzhenitsyn said it very elegantly. It is a universal law. Intolerance is the first sign of an inadequate education. An ill-educated person behaves with arrogant impatience, whereas truly profound education breeds humility. Mark Twain may have expressed the same thing regarding religious people more pointedly when he said, "It's not the parts of the Bible they don't understand that concerns me, it's the parts that they're absolutely certain of that scare me to death." People who are literalists, conservatives, often enjoy a very high level of confidence and absolute certainty about things that they simply do not understand. And as is seen in political satire, even when it is patiently explained to them, they still often just don't get it. This is exasperating in personal relationships, and I think that one of the worst things that Fox News does to our nation is to give C and D students some reassurance that their literalist and dogmatic worldview is not only accurate, but that it gives them the reason to refer to more educated, more reflective individuals in such dismissive terms as libtards, as if education and awareness were liabilities. And in fact, many conservatives do believe that facts have a liberal slant. When I returned to my job at a denominational Christian church following my sabbatical fellowship at Harvard, one right-leaning lawyer in the church suggested that I immediately take off another semester to study at our local Assemblies of God seminary to balance the liberal influence of my Harvard education. There is an assumption among many that academics is either liberal or conservative, when in fact scholarship is either good scholarship or bad scholarship. It's either well-reasoned or it's unsubstantiated. It's accurate or it's inaccurate. It is, to tie it back to satire, it's either interpretive in a critical thinking way, or it is literalist in an uncritical and receptive way. All of this appealed to me to talk about in this time of year when professors and teachers, along with students, are returning to their classrooms. Not all conservative thinkers, either about religion or politics or economics, are unintelligent. In fact, many are such disciplined scholars that they put the rest of us to shame. Many conservative religious leaders read more, work more, research more than I ever want to. What these analytical looks at conservatives' inability to understand satire have shown us is that some very smart people are hardwired to be literalist in their thinking. They are receptive. They absorb information. They remember information, but they don't interpret it. They are literalists. Many scientists, physicians, and others are brilliant in their ability to remember facts, to absorb huge amounts of information, but they become functionally retarded in the face of paradox or irony or satire, in the same way that you would not ask a computer to judge a poetry contest. However, though this is true for some people, for most of the people in the world who fall prey to propaganda, to religious or political manipulation, the real problem is a lack of critical thinking training, a paucity of education. Texas recently cut out all funding for critical thinking education. Can you imagine that happening in Texas? In that sense, the school and the church, communities of faith and universities, are in the same business. The progressive church is entirely dependent upon schools and colleges who produce critical thinkers. Without them, we won't survive. One of my favorite prophets, the young woman Malala Yousafzai, has said, with a gun, you can kill a terrorist. With education, you can kill terrorism. Of course, we know her story. She was shot in the head by a Taliban extremist because she was speaking out in favor of girls being allowed to receive an education in her native Pakistan. But as soon as she began to recover from the nearly fatal attack, her greatest desire was to go back to school. She knows that what will bring her country out of the darkness of religious extremism, out of misogyny, poverty, and violence is education. Not education alone, but nothing will work in the absence of education. Our war on terrorism has failed. It's failed because you can order a drone strike against a terrorist, but you can't order a drone strike on an ideology. The actual causes of terrorism are complex, and you cannot discount dimensions of economics, unemployment, tribal and civil wars, religious factions, and the vestiges of colonialism, and the loathing that all people everywhere in every country have for foreign domination. No one is ever happy being occupied by another nation. But still, there is no way out of our current tinderbox of terrorism that does not make education and critical thinking skills a priority. Where many nations, both in the first world and in the developing world, are realizing that if they want to have a successful future, that they need to do absolutely everything that they can to remove barriers from education, which includes both making our schools better and making them more affordable. In the United States, we keep interest rates on student loans high and keep raising tuition and making it more and more a benefit of the wealthy. That is a way for a nation to come to an end. If in fact we cannot afford to educate the next generation, then what exactly are we spending all of this money on a military budget for? What are we protecting? Teachers need to be compensated and treated like the necessary heroes that they are, because no matter what the cost of education ultimately is, it's obvious that the cost of ignorance is much greater.
You have been watching a progressive Christian video from the Community Christian Church of Springfield, Missouri. We encourage our viewers to donate to our efforts in feeding the homeless and hungry of our community. Write to us at Reverend Dr. Ray at AOL.com for more information.